And today we will speak about Microsoft Azure Identity and Access. Now let's start with what is identity and what is access. What is identity? Identity is who you are or who someone is. Now access is whether you have access to a particular website or whether you have access to something. Now digital identity is the data that uniquely describes a person or a thing and contain information about subject's relationship. Now let's look at what is authentication and authorization. Authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user. Now it is basically telling whether you have access to a particular website in this example. And authorization is the process of checking whether the user has access to the system. Basically, authorization checks whether user has access to a particular page in the website. So it is basically an authorization where you actually give the rights whether the user can edit, delete, etc. Now, different types of authentication are Windows authentication, Forms authentication, and passport authentication. Authentication always happens before authorization, and even when you are logged in as an anonymous user, you are authenticated as an anonymous user. Now, let us look at the different identity providers that are available from ASP.NET 1.1 to 4.5. In ASP.NET 1.1, there was no provision that was provided by .NET. That means you had to implement your own authentication and authorization logic. Basically, you had to implement your own username, password, where you type in your username, you type in your password, you click on submit. You click on submit, and what happens is it checks the database whether the user exists. Even for forget password, etc., you had to implement your own code. In ASP.NET 2.0, a membership provider was provided. The advantage of membership provider was that most of the code was actually taken care of. The forget password, username, password, etc., all was done for you. Now, in this membership provider, you had to log in using a username and password. That was the idea, and it was not considering that people will use social logins, because Facebook, Twitter, etc. Twitter did not exist, and Facebook was in its initial stages. Then the next came ASP.NET Simple Membership in ASP.NET 4.0. Simple membership provided support for social logins. It was extensible and it was unit testable. Unit testing was a bit difficult in ASP.NET 2.0 membership provider. In ASP.NET 4.5, universal provider was added, and currently ASP.NET 4.5, one ASP.NET identity is being used. Now, one ASP.NET identity is backward compatible with ASP.NET Simple Membership. That means you can actually log in using a username and password. It is testable. It supports social logins. It is extensible in the sense you can have your own custom schemas. The data of authentication and authorization can persist in CRMs, binary data, table, Oracle, or SQL. That means you have an option to store your authentication data in any of the third party or any of the, including binary data. Now it works with all ASP.NET applications, including Web API, SignalR, Windows Forms, Web Forms, and all across ASP.NET. It supports role-based authentication as well as claim-based. There is support for Owen integration. There is support for Windows Azure Active Directory. It is easy to plug in profile data. and you can access this mechanism from mobile, web, desktop, etc. Now let us look at the different scenarios of in which identity is used. First one is individual user account. When is individual user account usable? Individual user account is usable for ASP.NET applications, small and medium business, and consumer applications. Now these three are AD, Active Directory. Basically, that means it is used in enterprises. Active Directory is used in on-premises enterprise application and users, apps and users. It is used to manage users in enterprises. The advantage of Active Directory is it is a directory, and authentication is based on this directory. That means if you have a single Active Directory within your organization, all your applications within that organization check against this Active Directory for authentication and authorization. That means authentication is there is a single sign-on within the authentication within the organization for the Active Directory. The second one is Active Directory Federation Services. Basically, you have Active Directory based authentication within the organization, and you provide federation services for remote users to use the application. The third one is Azure Active Directory. It is a cloud-based cloud-based authentication authorization for applications which are cloud-based. Now let us look at the different authentication options provided in Visual Studio 2013. What I have done is I have opened a new web project, and these are different options provided to me, MVC, web, etc. I can choose any of these options, and I can click on change authentication to choose my authentication option. It provides me with 4 options. One is no authentication if I am not using any authentication for my application. Individual user account, basically you store all the authentication data in a database, and it provides social login. Organizational account is basically when you use Active Directory, Office 365, etc. Windows authentication is basically when you let IES module handle your authentication. So these are the different scenarios. Basically, if you're building a simple application or a web application for small business or or say a portal, then individual user authentication is the ideal for that. If you are within a large enterprise organization which has multiple application, then organizational account will be ideal. Windows authentication is basically when you let IES do the authentication for you. Now let us look at what is identity management and access management. Identity management is a process of managing the life cycle of digital identities. This digital identities would include people, systems, services, etc. And here you manage the profile of these identities as well. Access management is basically you are telling you want to give a particular rights, edit right, delete right, admin right, etc. to a particular person for a particular page, etc. That is where access management is. Ideally, you are assigning roles to a user, managing roles, adding roles, deleting roles, etc. That is what is access management. Now let us look at identity in detail. There are different types of identity: digital identity, federated identity, online identity, and identity management. Identity management we have already discussed. It describes management of individual principals, their authentication and authorization. Now let us look at what are principals. Principals are person, computer, process, or threats. I have added in a process or threats, let you know that digital identity let you manage even computational elements like process and threats. and it is an entity that can be authenticated by a computer system or a network. Online identity is basically when you sign on to a social, this one like Facebook, then you create an identity within that portal. And let us look at what is federated identity. Federated identity is you have multiple enterprise, and federated identity links a person's electronic identity stored across multiple distinct identity management system. Example of a subset of federated identity is single sign-on. In single sign-on, a token is authentication token is issued by a provider, and what happens is that that token is trusted across IT systems or even organizations. Now let's look at what is digital identity. Digital identity is nothing but data that uniquely describes a person or a thing and contain info about subject's relationship. Digital identity contains 0 or more attributes. Digital identity requires digital identifiers. Digital identifiers like name, age, etc. This will help to uniquely identify a person. And there are reservable identifiers like domain. Identity 1.0 was actually a framework that lets you handle logging in or reset passwords, etc. In Identity 2.2 is again a framework that is actually a successor to Identity 1.1. In Identity 2.0, the main features that are provided are two-factor authentication. That is, first you log in using your username and password. Again, you are sent an SMS or send an email and with a code, and you are asked to enter that particular code. That is actually two-factor authentication. Account lock. If you are trying to log on to that to a system multiple times, or you are trying to log in from a different location concurrently, then the system locks you in, locks the account for you for the security reasons. Account confirmation. This is an email. Generally, if you, in earlier days, what we used to do was a verification mail. We used to write code for that mail and send. This is built into Identity 2.0. There is provision for resetting your password. And once you sign out, there is an option to sign out everywhere. There is an enhanced password validator. And there is an IQurable for users and roles. IQurable for users and roles is useful when if you're in a large organization and if you want to query that information from the identity like AD, you want to know who your manager is. If you have a lot of employees, then IQurable is pretty useful for you. Microsoft Identity and Access Management, the two main components are Active Directory and multi-factor authentication. Active Directory, like I have explained earlier, it helps you manage your identity access as well as access. That means authentication and authorization can be handled in Active Directory. It gives you a central control over all the resources. Now, Active Directory can be on cloud and on premises, and there is provision by which you can link both these together. Now, Active Directory, like I have told earlier, it helps you to enterprise-wide. It will provide you single sign-on capability, right? And Active Directory provides reporting and analytics where you can find more information about the user, or what is the usage of a particular application, etc. So analytics provides you different metrics by which will help the management to figure out how they can improve the system. Now let us look at what is access control service. One of the when you log in, when you are storing data in your database, you're basically using a role-based identity. There is something else also called claim-based identity. Now, claim-based identity is a way to acquire identity information about a user and organization, other organization, and in the cloud. It is a way to get information, identity information of the user, right? And it simplifies the authentication logic for the applications. Claims are not what subjects can do or not do, is what subject is not. So basically, it does not tell what the subject can do or not, it tells what the subject is. So basically a claim about myself, if I'm making, it gives me identity like my first name, last name, email, and in claim-based authentication, you provide all this information like first name, last name, email, age, etc. to an application, and it is up to the application to figure out whether I am allowed in or not. So claim is nothing but a statement on a subject's person, subject such as a person or organization makes about itself to another subject, right? Claim works well with social authentication. It provides an easy way of claim-based claims. Now, claim is packaged as one or more tokens. It is issued by a security token service. A claim in an application is provided with authentication token plus authorization claims. So basically, in claim-based authentication, it is not just yes or no like in role-based authentication. It comes with more information. Now let's look at what is Microsoft Access Control Service. It is basically a cloud service which provide an easy way of authentication and authorizing users. So basically, the authentication and authorization can be controlled using Azure portal, or it can be controlled programmatically. So basically, you don't need to write any code within your application. ACS provides all the mechanisms to handle authentication and authorization. So the main advantage of ACS is once you are authenticated in an application, in one application, you can log on to different application with the same authentication. So basically, a second time you don't have to provide authentication credentials. These are some of the features of Microsoft Azure Access Control Service. Now, if you are looking to develop application using Active Directory in Microsoft Azure, then ACS is something that you should look at, right? This is probably the right approach to build application using AD. It is fully integrated with Microsoft Windows Identity Foundation. It provides social login, AD, etc. I'm not going through the list. The PowerPoint will be made available to you. I will quickly demo on a couple of things. One is authenticating users using Windows authentication, authenticate using individual user account, authentication authorization using individual user account, both MVC application as well as web API application. So let's start with the new application. What I have done is file new web project. I have given the name Identity and Access. And I have selected MVC application. And let me select the authentication type. In this case, I'll be selecting Windows authentication. What this means is authentication is handled by IAS. If I run the application, you can see that my name is displayed. Now, if you go to the layout page, you can find that at user.identity.name, this is the only code that you can see in this type of application, because entire authentication mechanism is handled in IAS. If you configure the IAS, what happens is you'll get a pop-up asking for your username and password. Once you enter your username and password, you are granted access to the system, and you can use user.identity.name to find which user has logged in. Basically, what happens is the authentication that is asking for username and password is handled by IAS. So when you click on www.somename.com, what happens is it asks for your username and password. Once you type in your username and password, you enter the application, and within the application you can identify which user has logged in using user.identify.name. So once you have configured, IAS is a very simple method of authenticating users. Now let's look at another application, an MVC application using individual user account. So again, file, new web project. I'm selecting MVC application, and I'm changing authentication to individual user account. And right now what I'm doing is I'm creating a new database. I have opened SQL Server Management Studio Express, and I'm creating a new database, identity and access. So this database will be used to store data about the application, as well as the authentication and authorization details also would be stored in the data. Now, first thing that I would do is actually go to web.config, add a new connection string, and I'm telling that this is where my authentication and this is the database where my authentication and authorization details will be stored. So I'm changing here in the screen. What I'm doing is I'm changing from default connection to identity and access. This is an identity module. So I'm telling that all my authentication and authorization data would go to a new database, not the default database, right? So this is where you change identity module, click on identity module, search for default connection, replace it with your database name, right? So once you have modified once you have entered the database connection string in web.config, and once you have modified the database in identity module, all your data will go to a database, your database basically. So let's look at the next screen. What I do is I run the application, I click on register. I would enter email and password and confirm password. And then when I click on register, what happens is my data would be stored in the database. So internally they are using a code first approach, so that all the tables are automatically created. Before I have my identity and access, I have no tables. Once I click on register and register the application, once I click on register and register the users, all these tables are generated for me. The different tables that are generated for me are ASP.NET roles, claims, user logins, net user logins, and ASP.NET users. Since I have registered a user, I can see that in ASP.NET users, there is only one data that is added. That is ID email. If you can just run this application and see that some profile data of the user is also being added here. And in 4.5, ASP.NET 4.5, it is very easy to add more profile data if you want to. Slides, okay. Now let us look at. All right. Now, how do you integrate your Facebook login, that is social media, to your login? That means you let authentication be handled by Facebook, Twitter, etc. Right now, I'll demo Facebook. Go to developers.facebook.com, and I have already added my application. So what I do is click on dashboard, click on codeforbeginner.com, and what I do is I select the app ID and app secret. And one more thing I need to do is I run my application, and the URL I have to enter. Right, the Facebook requires it to tell that you are that you requires the URL to be present for the authentication to happen. Basically, this is the return URL Facebook will use once the authentication has happened. Again, what I would do is I would just now to enable Facebook authentication, what you do is click on so basically what you do is you click on startup.auth.cs under app start, and here you are supposed to provide the application ID and secret, right? So what you do is you copy the application ID from the developer page, app ID, app secret, and you put it there. Then you run the application. All right. So once you have provided app ID in Visual Studio, once you run the application, you can click on this Facebook button will be made available to you in the login page. And when you click on login, it takes you to another page in which generally you will be prompted with the prompt which asks you whether you want to share the details. And if you click on yes, then the registration is it is authenticated, and once you come back to the application, you are asked to enter an email ID, and you can click on register to register that account. Now with Facebook authentication, if you run the select statement again, you can see that in ASP.NET user logins, a Facebook provider is added. This login detail is added. Earlier, when we used to use just without this one, only the ASP.NET user table was populated. Now, what we have done is we have authenticated the user. Now let us look at authorization. Authorization is basically when you give rights to a particular user. In this application, what we are doing is we have in the home controller, we have added a new attribute called authorize, and we are telling that only admin should be allowed to log in. So basically, the role user with the role admin should be allowed to log in. So basically, first thing we need to do is we need to add a role to the database. To add a role to the database, you can use insert into ASP.NET roles, ID, name. I'm generating a new GUID, and I'm adding a new role called admin. So this can be anything. It can be, say, new ID, comma, patient, new ID, comma, doctor, new ID, comma, accountant, etc. You can add any role, and you are assigning that particular role to a user, right? So insert into ASP.NET user role, user ID, and role ID. So this is where user ID I'm getting from select statement. I'm getting this user ID, right? Select ASP.NET users. So I take this user ID and put it here, user ID and role ID. Once I have inserted, I would once I run this, I would get the role ID, and I am inserting the role ID here. And you can add multiple roles to a user. So that means a role can be a teacher, and the role can be a student also. In a school, probably a role is actually a teacher. You have more rights, and you can add as a role as a student, which gives you access to certain pages. Now, the way of restricting a user is basically by telling this action method can be used only by this admin. You can put this role authorized attributes over the controller, or you can you can have a application wide attribute authorized attribute also. Now, let us look at how to authenticate users using ASP.NET in ASP.NET MVC Web API. Now, this is a question that I receive a lot of time. People want to know what is the best way to authenticate users in Web API. The answer is the simplest way to authenticate user in Web API is using the default provision provided in Visual Studio. What you do is, what I'm doing is I'm just adding another project to this solution, and I'm naming the project Web API application. Selecting Web API, I'm changing authentication to individual user account, and here I'm storing my data in the database. I would use the same database to store the data. So I have changed the web.config, and again I'm changing the identity module, the connection string. Now, if I run the application and if I am trying to access the values controller /API/values/index index method in the values controller, what happens is it throws an authorization error. That means authorization has been denied for this request. The reason is I have added an authorized attribute to the values in values controller to the index action method. So the index action method requires a user to be authenticated before the user can access it. Now, to start, learning about authentication in Web API, what I would do is I would find the list of all the APIs that are present. So easiest way to do is URL/help. If you are providing, it will list all the APIs that are available in your application. You can see a lot of APIs, and let's start with registering the user. So API/account/register. I would click on this in the help to get more details about this. So it is to register a user. It is actually using it is expecting a post request to the API/account/register account controller and the register method, and it is accepting JSON data. Here, if you can see, it is accepting the JSON data. It is looking at email, password, and confirm password. And if you click on and what you have to do is you have to open up Fiddler. So what I have done is I have opened up Fiddler. I have copied the API/account/register. That is localhost :5433 API/account/register, and I have selected the post method and the body in Fiddler. I'm providing the email, password, and confirm password. So once I click on execute, I can see a 200. The result is 200. That means the registration is successful. 200 tells that registration is successful. Now the next step is actually to access the token. To access a token, what you have to do is you have to do a post request to token, and you have to change the content type to application/xww form URL encoded. You have to supply the username and password, and one more, this one, grant type is equal to password. Now when you click on submit, you actually get a 200 HTTP. That means the token, your credentials has been accepted, and it returns an access token, an expiry date. It tells you the time that it will expire in and what the token type is. It tells that it is actually a token type called bearer, and the username is murugan at codeforbeginner.com. The last thing is how to validate the authenticate the user for this values controller. To do an authentication for values controller, what you have to do is you always have to pass a authorization bearer token with the GET request. Here, when you are values controller, what you're trying to do is you're trying to do a GET request. So method is GET, URL is API/values, and you are providing the access token, authorize call bearer, and you're providing the access token. Once this is executed, you will get a 200. That means the request has been successful. Now, another question that most of the people ask is, how do I get email or other details from Facebook? So this is one code that you can add to get more details from Facebook. One is click on open the application, startup.auth.cs, open that. And this code you can replace with this code. I'll make sure that this code is available to you. So what you're doing is you're creating a new Facebook provider, and on authenticated method you're overriding. That means once the authentication is done, the value will come back to this. And here you are actually getting the value in context.email. That means the return data will be in context, and you can get the value in context.email. So basically, this code, I'll make it available. So you create a new provider, the options, you are creating a new Facebook options. You provide the app ID, app secret, and provider, and just like the earlier one, use Facebook authentication to enable it. All right, then, thank you. So I think I have taken a little over additional 5 minutes. And in the next session, probably we can discuss in depth about Microsoft Azure Active Directory and other elements. Today, the main idea was actually to give an overview of different aspects of authentication and authorization. And we have covered a little bit of Azure, but we'll have a detailed session on Azure later. If you want to contact me, you can actually send an email to murugan@pixelstop.com. You can visit my website, www.codeforbeginner.com, or my blogs, www.mvcforbeginner.com and www.Microsoft Azure for Beginner. And on Facebook, we have a couple of Facebook groups, Microsoft Azure for Beginner.com. As well as MVC for Beginner. You can search on Facebook for the groups. You can post questions, and I will definitely make sure that I have answered those questions. Thank you.